Hi, and welcome back to Creative Chelsea. If you like this video, please let me know by giving it a thumbs up or commenting below. If you want to see more of my videos, press the subscribe button and click on the bell for notifications. If you need any Stampin' Up! Products to make these cards, you can visit my online store and the link is in the description box below. For today's tutorial, I have a fun die cutting and punch combination technique. Now, I really wasn't sure what to call this, and so I came up with a name, and maybe you have a better name for it, but I'm calling it double cutting using both a punch and a die cut. So this is the end result of the technique. I've got the die cut mountains, and they come from the Mountain Air stamp set. And then I've used the Everyday Label punch, and it's all on one piece of cardstock. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do this now, and then we will create a card using that image. So the first thing you need to do is get a piece of cardstock, and it needs to be larger than the height that you want. So this is a 2-inch strip of Whisper white cardstock, and I think it's about 5.5 inches in length. The length doesn't matter so much because we're going to be trimming it down to fit our card. So a couple of the things that I'm using are retiring, and so you'll want to get those if you don't already have them before June 1st, I think it is, maybe June 2nd. And you can see the whole list of retiring products in the description box below. I will place a link there. So luckily the Mountain Air stamp set, along with its coordinating dies, Majestic Mountain dies, they are not retiring. So you don't need to worry about that. But this paper piercing mat is, and it's one of the things that I always go to when I'm stamping with photopolymer stamps, which is what the Mountain Air stamp set is. So I've got my Mossy Meadow ink is the color I'm using, and I'm just going to ink up this mountain range and then stamp it on my cardstock. So you're just going to go ahead and stamp that, and probably near the bottom of your cardstock. So that way you have the space and the room for your punch at the top. So the next thing you want to do is stamp your greeting. And so I have chosen the greeting for you, and I'm doing that in the Memento Black ink. And that greeting comes from the Well Said stamp set. And this is a stamp set that will be still around in the new catalog. So you don't need to worry right now if you don't have this one, but it is a really great stamp set, and it does have some coordinating dies that come with it that are really fun and scripty. So I'm just going to be using the For You greeting that comes from this stamp set, and I'm just going to stamp it between these two mountain ranges, and it really can be anywhere. It just needs to be able to fit in your punch. Okay, so the next part is just a little bit technical. It's not hard, but you're going to need a ruler, and I have this really fancy purple glitter one, and then I have a paper trimmer. So you'll need to take your punch, and you're going to measure it at the widest point. So I want my paper to mimic this length, and so I need to measure at the widest point, which is at the ends of the circles. And so I'm just going to take my ruler and I'm going to measure it, and I see that it is about 2 3/8. Okay, so it's a little bit bigger than 2 3/8, but I'm going to just bring it in a little bit. So you want it to be smaller than your punch so that it can slide in without having a problem. So I'm just going to go ahead and measure it at 2 3/8 inches. So next I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to find where I want my punch to sit. And so if I want it to be if I want my greeting to be in the center, then I need to center it in that 2 and 3/8 inches section. If I want it to be offset, then I need to decide, you know, do I want it on the left or do I want it on the right? How do I want it to sit in there? And for my original card, I have it on the right. So I'm just going to go ahead and measure beginning at the top of this mountain peak. So I'm going to actually do it on the top. So I'm just eyeballing where that mountain peak starts, and then I make a little mark. And then I measure to 2 and 3/8 and I make another little mark. So I know that this is the width of my punch. So now I take my paper trimmer and I need to look for two things. One, I'm going to line it up in where my cut line is. So I have a groove and I know that my paper trimmer cuts in that groove. So I've lined my marking in that groove. And then when I close this, actually I'm going to move it over. When I close this, I know, and I bring my image over, I can see that my mountain top starts at 1 1/8 of an inch. And so that's going to be my ending point for my cut, or my beginning point. Oh, you know what? It's not 1 1/8. It's 1/8 less than an inch. So it's 7/8. So I'm going to go back, line up my marking, bring my blade in, and then my blade has markings as to where it will cut. So you can see that it's got a top and bottom mark as well as a left and right mark. And so I'm going to bring that blade all the way down until it hits 7/8 of an inch, which is about there. Okay, so you can see that I've cut only to the top of that mountain range. Okay, so then on this side, I notice that it's at the top of this little mountain range. So let's measure and see. So that is 1 1/8 this time. So by moving my marking back into my groove, I know that I need to stop at 1 1/8 of an inch. So then I go down until it hits about that measurement. Now you can see that I went just a little bit beyond that, and that's fine. It's not going to really ruin my technique or design. So the next thing you're going to do is get the die that you'll be using to cut out your stamped image. And it can be, I think this technique can work with any image and punch. So we're going to be experimenting with this with some of the new stamp sets and dies that are going to be in the new catalog. So look for those in the next couple months. So I like to use tape just to hold things together so they don't move around on me. And I'm just lining up my stamped image with the die. Now we're going to set up our stamped images to be cut with a Big Shot or other die cutting machine. And so I've got my platform, and this is a magnetic platform. And then I have a very well-loved plate that is on the bottom. And then I'm going to place this so that this is just your partial die technique is what we're kind of ultimately doing. And so you're going to then place your top plate only on the areas you want cut. And so that's going to be here on my right, or my top now, and my left or bottom. And so you can move and manipulate it however you want. If your plate is like mine, there's a little bit of a bevel here, and so it doesn't always cut exact. So like you can see that this side is just flat, and so I know exactly where it's going to cut. And so you just need to be careful and be aware that there's a bevel, and sometimes it's going to shift just slightly. And I just take my bevel, and you're just going to line it up. So where my plate is the full thickness is where I'm going to line it up, and there's a little line. And so I'm lining that up with my cut line here, and I'm lining it up so it only cuts off the paper on the left and the right side of my punch. And then I'm going to run this through the Big Shot. Okay, so you can see that it cut And it did cut a little bit farther than I wanted, and that's just because of that bevel. I'm never really quite sure where it's going to cut, but this piece can now be removed. We don't need it. And we can go ahead and do the same thing for the other side. And it looks like my die shifted a little bit when I removed that piece of paper. So I'm just going to kind of re-center it and put it down on here. I'm just going to fold it over. So I'm just going to re-center that and then fold it over to the back so it doesn't come off again. So we're going to do the exact same thing, but now on the other side of my die, and I'm just going to reposition this plate a little bit so it doesn't overcut too much. And then I'm going to run this through the Big Shot. Okay, so we've gone ahead and cut that. And then the very last thing is I want to cut the bottom of our mountain range. And so I'm just going to place that so that the edge of my cutting plate is over the bottom of the mountain range. I do not want to cut the top, so only over the bottom, and I'm going to run this through the Big Shot next. Okay, so now all of our die cutting is done. We can go ahead and remove, and now we're ready to do the punching. So this is what it looks like now. And you can turn it over and see that we have a little bit of overcut, but that's just fine. And now you're going to get your punch. So when I do this technique, I do need to have a piece of scrap paper, and it can be any kind of paper. You're not going to punch through it, so it doesn't matter. But what it acts as like a slide for your paper so that it knows where to go. So because we've cut this to the widest size, you're going to find that widest area, and you're just going to slide it into your punch from above. And then once it's in, you can remove that extra piece. And then you just kind of manipulate your punch just slightly, or your paper in your punch, until it is exactly where you want it to be. So because we cut it a little bit on the small side, it should move pretty easily back and forth in that punch. Now you can make this as tall or short as you want, as long as it fits within your die. So you can see that over here, I'm kind of getting close to the top of my die, so I can't bring it down any more on that right side. I could bring it down more on the left, but then I'd have a crooked punch. I could also bring it up to the very top and create a longer or a wider area if I had a bigger greeting. So those are some options that you could do. If you didn't cut the bottom, and if you had stamped this on a wider piece, you could also create that same look on the bottom of this die cut. And that might be something I try in a future video. All right, so I'm just gonna line it up. I want it to be kind of close to my greeting, or as close as I can get, and I want it to be nice and straight. So I think I like that look right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and punch that. And then you can leave these little half circles, or you can trim them off. And I didn't really feel like it added much to this image, and I liked it just to come right down and be straight with the mountain range. And so I went ahead and just trimmed those off like that. Okay. So there you go. You have now created a double cut image using both a die and a punch. So let's go ahead and use this on a card. Okay, so now we're ready to put together this fun card. And so what I've got here is I've got a card base of Pear Pizzazz, and it is cut to 5.5 by 8.5 and then scored at 4 1/4. And then I've got a card base that is 4 inches by 5 1/4. And what I'm going to do is off camera, I cut out 3 different colors of green using the 2 pine tree dies that are part of the bundle from the Majestic mountain dies. And it's nice that they give you 2 images and so I cut out 6 of them. And I did 3 in Mossy Meadow. I did 1 in Pear Pizzazz, so it's going to match that card base, and 2 in Old Olive. And what I'm going to do is just add these to my card front with a little bit of liquid glue. And I'm just going to start, it doesn't really matter how you add them, just give it some variety so that they are, the colors are kind of separated and it kind of looks a little bit like a forest. And with these dies, you can go ahead and punch out all these little pieces, or you can just let it be. I think it's kind of fun to have some in and some out. It just gives the tree some different dimension and feeling. So this first one is a Mossy Meadow, and I'm just going to add it here to the left. And I've just placed glue right down the center and in any areas where it was large enough to hold the glue. And then I'm going to do another Mossy Meadow. And this one's going to kind of be more in the center of my card. And a little bit lower. So maybe right about here. Whoops. Okay. And then my third Mossy Meadow will be on the right side. And just the height maybe somewhere in the middle between those 2 other ones that we've placed on our card. Okay. All right, so then I've got my 2 Old Olive, and I'll add those next. And those are just going to be on top of the Mossy Meadow color. This one I'd want right up here on the edge. Oh, my fingers are too sticky. Okay. And then my second one will just go between these 2 here. And I'm going to put it just between those 2 in height. So just kind of in the middle. And then the last one is Pear Pizzazz, and it's going to kind of blend into the background a little bit. And it's just going to have a little bit where we can see it, but I really liked that look. And so that's just going to go here in the middle. And your height could be, I don't know, between these 2, maybe a little bit on the higher side. Just press that down. Okay, so we've got our trees on our card base, and you'll notice that we have some overhang. So I'm just going to take a pair of snips and squeeze those papers together and then trim off anything that is coming beyond the card front. Like that. And that just kind of cleans it up the image so that our eye has a border and it doesn't go too far beyond. Okay, so for another textural element, I wanted to add some of this braided burlap trim to the bottom of my card. So I'm just going to cut 3 strips, and they're just going to sit at the bottom of my card. And I want them to be about the same size as my card front. So you can just lay those down and then trim it and do that 3 times. Okay, then you're going to add some glue and just start with the bottom one and then add the top one on top of that so that they can kind of all sit next to each other. So that just sits right on the bottom of that cardstock. Then add another layer of glue. and kind of push them together, and then a third layer. Okay. Like that. Okay, and then the last thing is our our double cut with a punch and die. And we're just going to add that on top with some dimensionals. So just turn that over, and you're just going to kind of add them in the middle where the cardstock is and not where the trim is. Okay, and then you can place one or two near the top of the punch. All right, so when you're ready to add this to your card, it's going to come off the card a little bit. So remember, we're going to trim it right along that edge. And so just pay attention to where you want it to be trimmed. So I'm just going to place it right there so that it's off to the left side a little bit, and it gives me a nice place right on that top of that mountain range to trim it, and around the top of that mountain range as well. So I'm just going to fold it over and trim it down that edge and do the same over here. So the burlap trim is coming off just slightly, and my since I'm left-handed, I can't turn it the other way. So we're going to just do it that way, and that works pretty well. I'm just going to come in here and trim just a little bit. There we go. So that that burlap trim is a little more coming out a little further. Just going to rough up that braided burlap trim a little bit just to give it some texture. And then I'm just going to add this to my card base. And you can add it with some dimensionals if you'd like. I just have it down on my card with some liquid adhesive. I think I'm going to do dimensionals this time, just to give it a little bit more depth. Okay, and then just go ahead and center that on your card base. And then the very last thing I want to do is add just a little bit of bling, and I have some rhinestones here. And I'm going to just color them with the dark old olive, and that just is going to tint them in a nice green color so that they kind of go a little bit better with my card. You can see how those are tinted. And then use a pickup tool to place those on your card wherever you'd like. I'm just going to put one down here kind of near my mountain range and my greeting. And the nice thing about using blends to color accessories like this is it dries pretty quickly. So you don't need to worry so much about it like getting on your fingers or whatever. And then I'm just going to place two up here in the treetops. And our card is all done. I hope you enjoyed learning this fun technique with me today and that you give it a try. Please subscribe, like, and share. Visit creativechelsea.com for a free tutorial of this project and to purchase the supplies needed. Have a creative day. Bye!